probably hold off for 30 seconds or a minute or so. We still use Zoom very heavily at Prodo, and every single time we have a call at the moment, it takes people a couple of minutes to join because everyone's using Teams. They've got to download it or find another way in. So we'll hold off for a minute or so, and then we'll get cracking. But yeah, really appreciate everyone's time today, and we've got a couple of panelists from one of our client organizations speaking with us as well today, like we did the last time we covered this session too. So really interested to get Stop for Homes Group's opinion on this topic too. And yeah, we'll start with a little bit of a recap on the previous session. How are we looking in terms of numbers? Have we got a bunch of people joined already?
Yeah, we've got 20 so far.
Okay, perfect. I shall just get that ready up there. Okay, cool. Well, we've just approached, well, 2 minutes past, so we might as well make a quick start. So yeah, just to begin with, want to say hello and good afternoon. It's a later time than we usually have the Housing Hive. Usually it's a morning session, so a little bit different today. But yeah, welcome to today's webinar, and thank you again for your time. It's really great to see so many people. I think a few of you came to the last session where we were on this particular topic. So good to see you come back, and hopefully some new faces as well today. So yeah, it'd be great. Just a little bit of, I suppose, a point to start with. I think on the last recording, there's quite a lot of background noise from certain people. So if you wouldn't mind staying on mute for the time being, that'd be really helpful. Just because we share the videos and things afterwards, and it's good to sort of avoid that background noise. So really appreciate that. But yeah, we'll get started with some introductions shortly. We'll move into today's topic, and yeah, hopefully have some time to explore some questions and a little bit of a Q&A at the end for everyone who's in attendance today. If you've got some questions, please do feel free to use that chat pane with any thoughts, any queries for us here at Prodo, or for the guys from Stockport as well. But yeah, we'll start on the intro. So my name is Jacob. Nice to see you all. I'm head of sales at Prodo, and it's part of my role to sort of help host this Housing Hive session. But for the most part, I'm tasked with getting to know people in the sector and sort of looking to see how we can help transform aspects of the housing space with digital solutions. But yeah, this Housing Hive is something we set up. We're coming up to 3 years now. We've got our anniversary birthday next month, so we'll be running a couple of things for that. But yeah, that's a quick intro to me. So I'll let the rest of the team from Prodo say hello, if that's okay, guys.
Yeah, hi, I will jump in. Am I on mute? No, not muted. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming today. I'm Jen. I'm head of client services at Prodo. I'm often in the building with Jake for these sessions, but I'm full of cold today, so I thought I'd stay home and keep my germs to myself. Really enjoy these sessions. It's crazy to think we're coming up on 3 years of doing these sessions, and you know how they've grown and the kind of topics and conversations we've covered since we started back in 2020, sort of in the throes of lockdown. So thank you for coming today. I will pass you along to Olivia.
Thank you, Jen. Hi, I'm Liv. I'm a senior account manager here at Prodo, and I also work closely with Stockport Homes as one of my clients. I think this is going to be a really interesting session. I know that pretty much every conversation that I have with clients at the moment, cost of living will come up in some way, shape or form. So it's a really important topic for the sector, and hopefully you'll get a lot out of today with our panelists as well. I'll hand over to Jo.
Thanks, Liv. I'm Jo. I'm another one of the senior account managers here at Prodo, working in the client services team along with Liv and Jen. And yeah, really looking forward to this session, and nice to see so many of you here today.
Great stuff. Thanks, guys. I'll just give a very, very quick overview of Prodo for those of you who don't already know us. So we are essentially a digital transformation partner agency for the housing sector, and we've been doing so for over 20 years now. Now, quite often what that looks like for us is the implementation of digital solutions in some way, shape or form, or earlier stage consultancy services to sort of help plan digital roadmaps and things. But during that time, across those 20 years, we've obviously built up a real sort of database and many, many contacts in this space. So we like to use these sessions to not only talk about great case studies and sort of the things that we're working on in this space, but also use our position to bring people together, just to sort of have these discussions and conversations, and I guess share some ideas, concerns, and which we're going to be doing today with our panelists. So I'll hand over to, we've got a couple of our client contacts joining us today, Tanya and Phoebe from Stockport. So I'll let you both introduce yourselves as well, if that's okay.
Hi, yeah, hello, I'm Tanya King. I'm the Head of Customer Engagement and Inclusion at Stockport Homes Group. So I get to do all the really interesting stuff in our housing organisation. So I do a lot of social and community investment work, which includes leading on our response to cost of living. So it's good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks, Tanya.
Hi, and I'm Phoebe Carolan. So I'm Digital Transformation Partner at Stockport Homes. So I look at our current processes and how we can streamline them and create efficiencies by introducing digital solutions.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. Yeah, great to have you both with us. Thanks again for your time and joining us again today. I'll just start with, I suppose, just a little bit of a recap of the, I suppose, the purpose of the session. So, as I mentioned at the very start, for those of you who were with us then, we hosted a Housing Hive on the very same topic towards the end of last year, I think October, November. But yeah, based on the interest of the particular, I suppose, discussion point and the concern around cost of living itself as a whole, it was our highest ever number of registrations for the webinars that we've run across the past 3 years, and also attendees as well. We actually ran out of time and kind of went over time to some extent as well. We couldn't quite get through everyone's queries, so we promised to revisit it this year. So that's what we're doing today. And we probably will do so again later in the year as well. But yeah, just to begin with, it's really clear why it's, I know Liv's kind of touched on it already, but it's really clear why it's such a focus on this at the moment. It's something which in some way, shape or form impacts almost everybody, but obviously operating in the sector that we do in social housing, and I suppose you guys more so than us, working directly at housing associations. But we're, I suppose, more exposed than most people when it comes to, I suppose, hearing about the impact of cost of living rising, and obviously the overall purpose of housing being affordable living solutions and support. When cost of living rises, the need for social housing rises with it, but also the concern around making payments for rents, for other bills, which again in turn is going to increase customer inquiries and required support services for people like yourselves. And we've already been discussing for years and years that customer inquiries are an all-time high in housing, hence the sector-wide sort of push in digital transformation, which we're very much there to support with, to sort of aid that customer experience and that overarching goal of freeing up internal staff to help spend that time with people who need them. But yeah, when it comes to high cost of living and this rise, it kind of impacts things in various ways. So I had a conversation only yesterday with a housing association down in South Wales where they were explaining that it's really actually hampered their potential plans for digital implementation this year and across the next sort of 3 years as well. It's almost kind of forced that rethink of how that roadmap might look to get the high value quick wins in quicker, and reconsider that investment for later on down the line as well. Whereas others seem to be really sort of pushing digital even harder to sort of streamline those processes, give customers that out of our support, maybe with the self-service solutions, with the idea of freeing up that team support to provide that information or support for those people who are potentially more vulnerable. And again, there's a whole thing around that, isn't there, around pushing digital. Do some of these people actually have access to it? So that's, I'm sure, will be a discussion point today. But yeah, just to very quickly summarize, last time we caught up on this, we were again joined by Tanya from Stockport, but also Paul, who Phoebe works really closely with on the business improvement and digital standpoint. And we also had Rachel as well from the Chartered Institute of Housing, if I can get it out of my mouth well enough, CIH. But yeah, it was really beneficial to get that different sort of lens on that particular topic. So Rachel explored some of the insights from CIH's cost of living briefings, which are, those of you who don't know, CIH obviously being a membership organisation, they've made the cost of living content actually open for everybody, where that content is usually just for sort of subscribers. I thought, Tanya, you brought a really interesting take, being involved in the initiative that you are at SHG around the sort of the changing demands within those money advice and energy advice teams. And then Paul spoke about his involvement around the sort of digital side of things with Phoebe and their team, sort of digitizing, automating those internal processes, maybe with robotics at times as well, to, again, sort of free up those staff members who are in the day-to-day making sort of data entry or moving through manual processes, to therefore spend their time with direct sort of customer support. I guess changes since then. So last time we covered this topic, things have moved on somewhat. So we've seen that unexpected increase in inflation. We've seen continued relatively sort of high costs for general amenities like food, fuel, energy. Fuel may have come down a little bit, actually thinking about it. But and yeah, of course, the sort of the 7% rent cap being nearly here in April as well, and sort of preparation for that generally across the sector. But yeah, Liv, I know you spent a little bit of time on the CIH briefings yourself around this topic, and we were discussing it a little bit internally the other day, weren't we, about I picked up one in particular, which you may cover in a bit more detail, but I remember you mentioning 1 in 12 private renters being at risk of eviction, and that sort of hypothesis we were talking about off the back of that maybe being that social housing is probably seeing a bit of an uplift in terms of applications as well. But yeah, I wondered if you've got any sort of takeaways, or you can elaborate on that, or any further points, then we can, I suppose, explore Tanya's and Phoebe's sort of take on those as well.
Yeah, of course. So since we last met, there's been 2 briefings, one in January and one that just came out last week. So the one in January had a focus on Black and ethnic minority communities, and it's really interesting. If you want to give it a read, I've put a link in the channel. This month's was focusing on rural communities, but both obviously had a focus on the wider implication of the cost of living crisis as well. As Jake said, it's no surprise that a headline topic in this one was inflation that's risen to 10.4% in February. But obviously we have to have a focus on what that means in practice. As Jake said, gas, electric, fuels, household services, and things like food and drink, and food and non-alcoholic drinks, especially, they noted, have really increased. And we obviously have an acute awareness of the impact that that'll have on your tenants within the social housing space. So one of the interesting facts that I found was that families have faced a potential £811 annual rise in their cost of the regular shopping basket, which I just thought was a pretty wild stat. If you think about your regular income, I think about what I'm paid, whatever someone is paid, that is a significant amount of increase, and that has kind of had an effect on food banks, 90% of which that were studied had reported an increase in demand in the past year compared to last year, which is obviously a substantial increase. One of the other things that I took away from on the latest briefing was the number of households that are required to spend more than 10% of their income on energy, and that had risen from 4.93 million to 7.39 million, which is obviously a really massive stat. So one to kind of take away from that as well. What else has happened? We have obviously had the budget announcement, and although kind of reading various different sources, there were some steps to tackling the energy and cost of living crisis. There were some steps for energy prices in childcare. There was a kind of general thought that there was probably not enough of a focus on the unaffordability of homes. That was quite an interesting one, and that is especially prevalent in rural areas. So there's a really increased risk of homelessness in those areas as well. So the focus on rural areas is quite an interesting take on that briefing. So I'd encourage you to go and have a read of that. I think all the information that I've read, it just relays the information that we need to have an increased focus and awareness on the issues faced by tenants, and obviously the initiatives that we can put in place to support tenants. So I guess what we'll be hearing from Stockport Homes, and hopefully you can all continue to share initiatives within this group so that we can kind of help take whatever steps we can towards tackling that cost of living crisis as a sector together.
Great stuff. Thanks for that, Liv. No, all really interesting points, and some of them quite shocking, to be fair, aren't they? And you can really see why people are being sort of pushed from a financial point of view in terms of the upwards trend of outgoings from those bank accounts, and obviously rising food bank usage and those sorts of things. So no, really interesting points. But yeah, I wondered any of those points that Liv just sort of referred to there, Tanya, from your perspective. I know you talked about some of this last time we met around the money support and energy advice teams and things, but anything in particular that you have around related to those points that you've seen change since, I suppose, the past sort of 3 to 4 months since we last met?
Yeah, I think so. Particularly, we've done a large scale study as part of a Greater Manchester pilot, and that was around use of digital in social housing by social housing tenants. And one of the things that we found, which did shock us, was that 1 in 4 of our tenants reported that they don't use the internet. And that is major. If you think everyone who's listening to this event thinks, how on earth would you manage, getting a bus ticket, or, applying for schools, or doing your own job at work, or just communicating with friends and family. If you haven't got the internet, none of that is possible. And that was really quite an important stat for us to understand, that it's not just a case of people being on or offline, but there's also a big grey area in the middle where people who previously were online are now not online because they can't afford to be consistently. And also people who are online may not have enough skills to be able to use the internet. and digital for all the ways it could be used in terms of applying for jobs, and in sort of all the life improvements that you can make by accessing, you know, services and information online. So that's been a big thing for us as a business, trying to balance the need to move people onto digital in order to free up resources to help those who aren't, but also the fact that we probably are for the foreseeable future going to be providing non-digital services for that core group of people who either can't or won't use online services. That's one of the key things for us as a business.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one, isn't it? And I think yeah, when we talk about that digital usage and adoption, quite often we're from our perspective as a digital transformation agency, we're talking about optimizing the front end of some sort of solution where, you know, if we change certain things here, if we integrate these systems together, things will work better. But I suppose there is those points that you kind of mentioned, and I guess, you know, those prior steps really, isn't there, around people actually having the means of engaging with it generally. So do they have the access to do so? Can they afford the devices or the data or connection, but also the training side of things as well? So we covered a digital inclusion piece on the Housing Hive a few months ago, actually, and those are some of the themes. What are the sort of things that you're familiar with that Stockport are doing to sort of assist that? And you mentioned some potentially sort of incorporating Wi-Fi in some of the properties and those sorts of things. Is that one of the?
Yeah, we've had trials over the last few years of various ways of incorporating Wi-Fi, particularly into our multi-storey blocks, where you can obviously benefit a large number of residents in a relatively small area. So we've tried that out. We have 12 of our 22 blocks have really low-cost Wi-Fi in them. So for 90 pence a week, people can have. I would say it's basic. It's not like for streaming Netflix on, but if you didn't have any other source of internet, it would be enough to be able to manage day to day, you know, in terms of shopping and online banking and emailing and that kind of thing, and doing general, you know, sort of transactional stuff. We've also got free Wi-Fi in all our community centres that we fund, and also in our sheltered schemes to try and encourage older people around the sort of social isolation side as well. And so we work really closely with our local partner at Start Point to be part of the National Data Bank. I'm sure a lot of the housing colleagues in other organisations have made use of that, so that when people are really in a poor situation, they can access free SIM cards. And we also operate a really successful device lending scheme where people can borrow laptops and tablets, and we found that a lot of those people have ended up keeping them long term. It was initially sort of planned that it was going to be for sort of 2 or 3 months to tide them over a difficult period, but they've ended up keeping them because people just can't afford to buy one. So that's been a real thing for us. I'll say the other thing that was mentioned by Liv earlier was around the rent increases that we know that they are going to be hitting next week, and also service charges, particularly around energy, because quite a few of our tenants have been protected for the last 12 months because we had a long-term commitment from our energy supplier around the pricing, but obviously we can't absorb that forever. So that's coming in, and we have actually seconded 2 officers to be dedicated to working with people who are being hit by the highest increase in heating charges, in order to solely support those people to access anything they can in terms of discretionary housing grants and housing support grants from the council, etc., just to help keep them in their property and tide them over until things improve.
Yeah. And is that something that you've had to put in place off the back of demand, basically?
Yeah, completely. Yeah. I mean, we knew that obviously the issues were coming, but then when we've seen the level of the price increases and obviously the rent cap as well, then we've had to put that in place, because the money, as you mentioned at the beginning, the money and energy advice teams that we have in-house, we're very lucky to have them, and we know that, but they're absolutely inundated with people, and they're finding that more and more they aren't able to actually increase their income. It's more a case of helping them manage their debt and attempting to help them reduce their outgoings. So that's been a massive challenge for us, the level of demand that we've faced, and it just going up on a monthly basis.
Yeah, no, I can imagine, definitely. I suppose one angle on that whole demand piece, and I kind of touched upon a contrasting point a little bit earlier on around, obviously there's the steps prior to digital implementation, digital solutions, but you mentioned that was it 1 in 4 people don't access the internet. So there's still a large remit of the customer base that do, isn't there? And I think a lot of what we do and what we've done with Stockport and other clients is sort of help to facilitate that digital experience for people who do have the means to do so, and make that as streamlined and easy as possible. So they're just almost taken care of in a way from a self-service point of view, I suppose, to some extent. So I guess, free up that time to sort of cope with that demand, I guess. Definitely, and those initiatives on top of that definitely help. But I suppose that leads us into maybe a couple of questions for yourself, Phoebe, I suppose, from a digital point of view. I know you work a lot on the sort of internal processes at Stockport around making those efficient with digital. Is there particular things that you've had to work on with yourself and Paul and the guys around, based upon that demand sort of digital initiatives to help?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a very much automation first mentality for a number of reasons, due to increased demand, as we've mentioned, but also increasing those efficiencies so that we can deal with things a lot quicker. So, for example, you mentioned at a few moments ago around private landlords struggling with costs, so there might be an increase in people then therefore applying for social housing. If we have then increased people on our housing register, we then have a higher demand on our housing allocations team. It's not an easy process to process someone's application. There are a lot of things that you have to go through and verify. So that is a process that we're looking at the moment at automating. And what that will mean is that something that is currently taking the team a big chunk of their day, I think it equates to maybe 2 full-time staff to deal with these applications. A bot will then deal with it. So a customer will then therefore have their application made live, and they will therefore be able to bid for properties a lot sooner than they would if they was being dealt with by a human. Yeah.
No, so I think it's a really good point. The application side of things, definitely with that, that sort of clear uplift off the back of what's going on. It's one which we've been involved in with a few organisations in the past. It's one of those where, you know, we can sort of digitize and almost productize websites and even self-service portals to some extent, which are all quite similar. We've found that whole application process differs from organisation to organisation, and it needs to be quite specific to how they're sort of handled, I suppose. But yeah, we saw things like for it was either for Accent or for Plymouth Community Homes, that once we've digitized the application process, and they both have a route in CBL, and Accent also have direct applicants as well. But yeah, once that was digitized, it was a case of streamlining that process so much it was replacing like 40 odd paper forms. So from an efficiency standpoint, yeah, and getting people in sooner, allowing them to sort of manage that from a self-service standpoint, really beneficial. But yeah, no, really interesting point. So thanks for that, Phoebe. Anything in the chat at all, Jen or Liv or Joe, that we could sort of touch upon at the moment so far?
Not as yet, but just to add to that point about applications. Yes, so with other organisations who are sort of going through similar processes, as well as the sort of huge saving in terms of like paper-based processes, the time saved by those teams has been really huge. So organisations that we've worked with have reported that typically, in terms of the colleague time going into that process, it's been halved, or even it's a quarter of what that colleague time investment needed to be previously in order to move an applicant through the process. But actually it progresses much more quickly as well. As you said, Phoebe, you know, it's about expediting that process as much as possible. So yeah, it's really compelling seeing those kind of numbers, but obviously it's weighing in the balance in terms of, you know, other kind of pressures in terms of budget. It's where does that fit in the priority order for investment with your organisation. But it'd be really interesting to hear from others in terms of how they're handling sort of challenges like that, and also going back to Tanya's point about that level of digital exclusion, which is, you know, perhaps quite surprising for everyone. I think we were really shocked to hear those kind of statistics, that level of the customer base are actually excluded for one reason or another currently. Yeah,
that was interesting. Yeah, I think something just popped into my head when you were talking then is, I suppose it is a related point that whilst talking about applications and sort of getting people into properties, when we met with Rob Carter, who's Guinness Homes marketing manager and one of the last Housing Hives, I think it was maybe the one before this one. But yeah, he was kind of reporting they found for shared ownership sales in particular, applications from people for shared ownership properties, to sort of the average income for those people is actually going up. So that's on the sort of the increase. So I suppose kind of feeds into that whole cost of living side of things, that people who maybe in the past wouldn't have had to sort of consider shared ownership as a home ownership option, now are having to do so. So that's sort of seeing a bit of an interesting correlation there. I know we've talked about sort of rentals and sort of applications for social housing so far, but I think that's the same for home ownership as well, which is quite an interesting point and kind of feeds into that point quite nicely. Anything further on that, Jen, that I've missed? I know we discussed about the other day.
No, I think you covered that really well. Thank you. Sorry, I was still on mute there. But yeah.
Okay, cool. Great stuff. Anything further from yourself, Tanya, that you sort of seen change, or anything that you sort of, I suppose, rather than what you've seen change, what you're sort of planning for over the next 6-12 months based upon the sorts of things that you were involved with at SHG?
Yeah, I think part of it is that we've been really fortunate that because we're an arm's length management organisation, we still have really strong partnership with the council, and they have a trusted partner scheme whereby they've allocated quite a significant amount of funding to us to be spent on households in need. So going forward, that's a massive boost to us, because it means that basically they give us the money and then they trust us to be able to decide for ourselves with some criteria which households are going to benefit from that. So rather than having to go back to them and go through loads of bureaucracy, we can actually just keep a spreadsheet of who's benefited from it and allocate it really quickly. So that's something that we've had a small amount of money since Christmas, but then there's going to be more funding coming from April, and that's a really positive thing for us, particularly in terms of things like we operate a furniture recycling scheme, and we also operate our food pantries, and they're two areas where we've really benefited from that funding. And also they've given a pot of money to our rents team and our advice team, where they can give out vouchers, or they can top up people's rent accounts if they're in a bad way for some reason, and as I say, discretionary housing grants. So that's something going forward that we think, although it might be a sticking plaster, it's a relatively long-term and large sticking plaster, so at least it can enable us to support people through the next 12 months, because it's a year-long funding pot. So that's something that we're really, really grateful that we've got that relationship and that we've been able to benefit from that. I think we've also got, going forward, a lot of plans around some of the cohorts of people for whom employment is the main way out of poverty. And we're increasingly seeing over 50s who've retired and then decided that they basically can't live off their pension and they're going back into work. But for quite a few of them, they don't have the digital skills to be able to go back into the sectors that are recruiting. So that's a big challenge for us. The sectors they've come out of have made them redundant, or they've retired early or whatever, and then they aren't actually able to go back to that kind of employment. So those digital skills that we mentioned earlier are even more important. So if they're going to go long term into other employment and other sectors, they really need support from us to do that. So one of the things that we've identified as part of the study that we did around the digital connectivity was to make a much stronger link between our employment team and our digital offer, so that when people are going to jobs clubs, we've got, rather than just saying, oh, we'll help you with a job application, we're actually looking in more detail at their digital skills in a wider way and seeing what we can do to support them when they're at home as well as at the job club, to be able to be online and use our services, not just for employment, but like you mentioned, for a whole range of different purposes, applying for housing and benefits and all sorts of things.
General sort of quality of life, I suppose, these days.
Yeah, that we sort of take for granted that we do online. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. No, it's one of those points, isn't it, where you mentioned a couple of things that you sort of referred to as a sticky plaster, even albeit quite large. Those sorts of initiatives are, I guess, more longer term, aren't they, around sort of helping solve this for people going forwards, I guess, and maybe less of those short-term things, whilst it's that sort of typical model, isn't it, of providing value quite quickly and trying to solve things right now to make things a bit more comfortable. But also, how do we sort of look forwards and help people in the long term? So that's a really interesting point. Do you know much about, you sort of touched upon it quickly before, and Liv made the point about the food banks earlier, but I know that your local pantry service is sort of attached to Stockport Homes Group, is that sort of franchise service attached to it's actually a couple of organisations, I think Skylight as well. Have you got any information on how sort of, I guess if there's probably will be, but sort of uplift on the usage of those, or the sort of the uptake related to your local pantry?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've got 5 of your local pantries in Stockport where the model originated, and we, for the first time, have had to put a stop on any new members. In the past, anyone that wanted to join has been able to, but since sort of just before our previous session with yourselves, we've had to introduce waiting lists, and then we had to quite quickly close the waiting list because we were giving people false expectation that they were going to become a member anytime soon, and they weren't. Because in the past, when people have been a pantry member, they've tended to dip in and out according to need. So, if they got back into work, they might stop coming, and that's fine. That's how it works. It's quite flexible. But then we were finding that more and more people were actually needing it in the long term, so they weren't moving on, and therefore we were really unable to take on new people. And that's been compounded by supply issues that I know people are aware of. Some of the supermarkets having supply issues, but they're also becoming a lot more efficient, so they don't have as much food waste, so we aren't benefiting from some of the food that they used to donate to us. So that's obviously, we don't want to take on more members than we can provide good food for, so that's been a real challenge. But nationally, in a few weeks' time, we're going to reach our 100th pantry nationally.
Wow.
So that's been a real fantastic success. We do it in partnership with Church Action on Poverty, CAP, and they franchise the model across the country in sort of Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland and England. So that's a real, in a way, it's a success because it's obviously a model that's needed, but on the other hand, the number of people that are using the pantries is indicative of how people are struggling and needing a more affordable source of food.
Yeah, you're right. It is that sort of double edge, isn't it? In that it's great to hear that that's sort of doing so well, but it's almost a little bit sad that we need to sort of push this sort of service.
It is, yeah.
At the same
And we've
time,
got to the stage now where the pantry, because we weren't taking on new members, we wanted to be able to offer people something instead. So we've actually started offering food bank vouchers at the pantry, which for us is completely against what we would want to do, because our culture is it's slow dignity and choice and sustainability. But actually, we've got to be realistic that if we can't offer people a service through the pantry, we need to offer them something else to plug that immediate gap. So yeah, that's been a bit of a challenge for us to accept that was the right thing to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. I think I remember when we were first involved with building the first version of the website of your local pantry. I'm sure at that point there was about 15 or 20 pantries.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Now it's up to nearly 100. You were saying,
gone mad,
amazing, gone absolutely mad. And I remember Verity was saying it was going to. We were kind of like, oh, is it really going to hit that? But yeah, it's seems like it has. So no, it's really interesting. But any thoughts from anybody who's in attendance there? Any sort of specific questions that anyone's got for Tanya, Phoebe, for anyone else? Feel free to pop yourself off mute and sort of open the floor if there's anything in particular you want to sort of discuss or ask. More than happy for you to do that. Feel free. But yeah, unless there's anything further from yourself, Liv, from some of the research you've carried out, you want to sort of loop back on or touch upon based on what we've talked about at all?
No, I just think that everything that you've been saying, in particular, Tanya, relating to food banks, the increase of the basket, all those kind of things, it's really hitting home. And I think, again, from the private rental and the home, buy to let homes to rent, kind of angle, you kind of take, you take a look at what's happening in your immediate circle, and friends of mine who are renting and thought they'd be able to buy, can't buy, or they've applied for a mortgage and the inflation and increased interest rates have gone up, so they're now unable, they're now looking at different options, and a few of them going down the shared ownership route. So it's really interesting to see, but incredibly sad in terms of the food bank usage. And I guess everybody, if you can donate to food banks as you go to your local shop, then we should be doing so.
No, definitely. I think everything that we talked about today is just kind of hits home around the sort of the reason why we're all involved in this particular sector, isn't it? From even at our stage as a consultant involved, but it really sort of I suppose it showcases the great work that you all do in this space and why we're so happy to be involved with it. So no, it's great to hear, albeit quite an unfortunate situation that everyone a lot of people find themselves in. So no, but yeah, unless there's anything further from anybody, we can I suppose we can potentially wrap up. Anything from yourself, Jen, Joe, from Phoebe, anybody?
We haven't got anything in the chat, but
Okay.
I think I would just echo those comments from Liv particularly, and Tanya and Jake as well. But it's been really good to sort of talk a little bit more today, reflecting on what I think it was 3 months ago, wasn't it, when we first covered this topic.
So, yeah.
And it's a theme that's not going away, and actually, if anything, based on what we're hearing today, what we're all experiencing in our own circles, it's just worsening at the moment. So I think we will continue to return to this topic. So if anyone has any sort of comments or thoughts, anything you'd like to hear from us in future, anything you'd like us to cover, feel free to sort of either pop us a note or get in touch with Jake or one of us directly. We'd be very happy to take your comments on board, and hope to see you again very soon.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks for that, Jen. Just a quick note on the next session. So we hold these every last Thursday of the month as of this year. So we can plan for it a little bit easier. But yeah, the next one will be very, very different topic, all focused on artificial intelligence, AI, and sort of how we can best use AI to sort of support customers, but also your internal teams as well with efficiencies, and I suppose all feeding into the same sort of thing, really. We're all here to improve customer experience, whilst freeing up and sort of helping those people internally spend their time with highest value output possible. So that's what we'll be covering, and that will be on the 27th of April. Yeah, I just wanted to say another point actually we'll pop into the email is we're running another survey at the moment. So we wrote a book a couple of years ago about channel shift in the space, all around sort of our experience of working with hundreds of housing associations on these sorts of projects, and again feeding into what we sort of discussed around digital implementation, sort of making the most of that. But we are currently writing a follow-up to that book, and it's all driven by survey responses as well. So we'll pop a link in there. There's also a potential incentive to sort of help either win some Amazon vouchers or even donate that value to your favorite charities as well. So we'll include that in the follow-up email. But yeah, just to sort of close, I just wanted to thank you all for taking the time to join us again today. Obviously, a very, very important topic, and one which is highly important, certainly at the moment, with things seemingly just slowly getting worse. And there's obviously a lot of things that you guys in the housing space are doing incredible work on. So it's great to hear more about that, particularly from yourselves, Tanya and Phoebe. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us today on this one. We'll no doubt reach out for you for the next one when we inevitably run this again in a few months. Yeah, I thought that was really good, really insightful, and it was great to hear from you both. And yeah, hopefully we'll see many of you for the next one at the end of April talking about AI. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.